Hello everyone, my name is Luke, aka the Horror Nerd, and welcome back to the Dread Central Show. I hope you guys are doing well today. I know that we're already 10 days into New Year's, but I'm going to say it anyways. Happy New Year's. I hope you guys are settling into 2025 well. I hope you guys are in the process of reaching your goal. And I say this to a lot of people, and I'll say it now. There's a reason why goals are sometimes so hard to reach. It's because we're all playing life on the hardest difficulty, because it's on the hardest difficulty by default. But depending on how determined you are and depending on how much faith you have in yourself, you will never give up. Because if you know just how strong you truly are, and if you have the confidence in yourself that you must have to be able to encourage yourself to never stop trying and always keep moving forward, even if the path is blocked by obstacles, get through those obstacles anyway. Find another way, break those obstacles if you must. The point is to never stop moving forward, never back down, and if you do fall down, get back up, don't stay down, always keep going. So I hope you guys are doing that. I hope you guys are staying encouraged. I hope you guys are doing well out there. I know that the world is pretty crazy nowadays, a lot of bad people in the world, but don't quit. I never do, so you shouldn't either. I do have a Discord server that is kind of dead, unfortunately, but I am trying to revive it. And I also do have a Discord account, obviously. Contact me on Discord, PSN, Xbox, whatever the case, and I will be happy to talk with some of you guys. Or just leave a comment and we can talk down there. It doesn't matter. And yeah, the one last thing I want to say before we get into the topic of today's discussion video is I just want to thank all of you guys so very much for helping me reach 150 subscribers. You guys are more than amazing. You guys are spectacular, each and every one of you. I wish I can do more to show my appreciation, but unfortunately I can't at the moment. At least not until I become a game developer. When I become a game developer, then I could probably show my appreciation. Your boy's gonna be making some of the best horror games out there, trust me. But for now, all I have is this little YouTube channel of mine. This channel does mean a lot to me, so by supporting it, subscribing, liking my videos, actually being entertained by my videos, it really does mean a lot to me. You know, you guys have got me right in the feels. I really wish I can show more appreciation by doing more things, but this is all I can do. All I can say is thank you. I know it's not a lot, but for now it's really all I can do. Anyways, now that that's out of the way, let's get straight into the topic of today's discussion video. Now, we all know that the next Resident Evil game is coming. We're probably going to get some news on it this year. And the next Resident Evil game that's coming is most likely going to be Resident Evil 9. There's been a bunch of leaks about it. Apparently, the next Resident Evil is going to take place on some island, and it's going to have enemies similar to the Los Illuminados from Resident Evil 4. And personally, like, I know that this is, like, off topic for the main topic of the video here, but I'm actually not too sure how I feel about it. I think we'll save this for another video because I do kind of want to talk about this as well. But for now, this is about RE5, so we're going to talk about RE5 because RE5 Remake is also coming. I think it's pretty much confirmed at this point that Capcom will eventually revisit Resident Evil 5, just like how they have revisited Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4. And the remakes have been absolutely spectacular. This one guy on Reddit actually was like, don't you think Capcom is giving us too many remakes instead of mainline sequels in the series? And I was like, hell no. Like, I don't know how someone could think that, because Capcom has done a great job at giving us sequels and remakes in the Resident Evil series. We got Resident Evil 7 and 8, 2 mainline entries, and then we got 3 reimaginings of previous Resident Evil games. And these remakes really are something special because these are not just simple little remasters or reimaginings. These are like completely different and new versions of these older Resident Evil games. These truly are some of the best remakes in the gaming industry because these remakes really show developers how it's done. You don't just do a shot-for-shot remake of the originals, but you're also just making completely new versions just using the same concept, but that's the only thing that's the same. These remakes truly do feel like brand new experiences and brand new games in general. So Capcom's just been knocking it out of the park. And of course, Capcom are the ones who have started this whole remake craze in general. I mean, so many other horror games have gotten remakes just because Capcom showed everyone else just how successful a remake can be if it's actually successful to begin with. I mean, because if you was to imagine remaking a game and somehow the remake is actually not as good as the old saggy original. I mean, that's like a young person being beat in a boxing match by a 60-year-old man with arthritis. Like, at least that's my funny way of seeing it. So, obviously, the Resident Evil remakes have been extremely successful. Except for Resident Evil 3 Remake, which got a bit more mixed reception because I guess people didn't like that it was a bit shorter than the original, which I can definitely see, but I still thought Resident Evil 3 was a great game, you know, the remake at least. But, like I said, Resident Evil 5... I'm dying here, don't mind me. Anyways, Resident Evil 5 is the next game that is definitely going to get a remake. Some people think it's going to be Resident Evil 1 or Code Veronica. Some cats even think it's going to be Resident Evil 6. I don't know how someone can think that they would remake Resident Evil 6 before Resident Evil 5. That would just kind of be going... that would just kind of be going backwards. That's like pouring the milk before the cereal. Or pouring the soda on the table before pouring it inside of the cup. Like, that would just be taking a major step backwards. I don't know how people could even assume that, but anyways, the thing about Resident Evil 5, I feel like Capcom really has their work out for them right now, because the thing about Resident Evil 5 is, the way I see it, Resident Evil 5 was the worst Resident Evil game in the series. Now, the reason why I say that is because Resident Evil 5 was the first Resident Evil game to completely embrace the more action side of the overall Resident Evil series. Because after Resident Evil 2, because some of you may not remember, but even Resident Evil 3 had a little bit of action in it. And then Resident Evil 4 had even more so than 3. And then Resident Evil 5. Bro, Resident Evil 5 is literally just a version of Resident Evil 4 that's just jacked up on steroids at this point. Like, the thing about Resident Evil 5 is Resident Evil 5 just had too much action. And you see, the thing is, like, this is why it's better to add new ingredients to an old formula instead of just changing it up completely. You know, because when you add new ingredients to an older formula, those new ingredients can add some new taste and texture into the old formula. And all of a sudden, that old formula feels new again. It feels new again and it feels fresh. That's the importance of adding new ingredients into an older formula. It adds everything back to it that it lost when it was new to begin with. You know, because when a formula starts getting old, I get it. Developers want to try something new. You don't want to be like Call of Duty over here, where every sequel is the exact same. You want your sequels and you want your new entries to feel different from the previous games. Which is why, like I said, you don't want your formula to stay old and just lose its special taste. You know, you want it to still have that fresh, new taste that made it good to begin with. So that's why it's better to just add new ingredients and some new little elements here and there instead of just changing the formula to begin with. Because, bro, the reason why Resident Evil 5 was so bad is because it did just that. It completely changed the overall formula of Resident Evil, and not for the better. I mean, when you compare Resident Evil 5 to any of the games that came before it, Resident Evil 5 doesn't even look or feel like a Resident Evil game. Not only did Resident Evil 5 lose its horror elements, but it also lost the core gameplay of Resident Evil in general. Now, of course, Resident Evil 4 and 5 do have very similar gameplay style, but at the same time, Resident Evil 4 was still mostly a horror game. It still had puzzles, it still had resource management and crafting, and the enemies were still scary, and you still somewhat felt like you were vulnerable, despite how strong Leon and his Spartan kicks were. In Resident Evil 5, though, like, it's not just because of the fact that you've got a partner, but in Resident Evil 5, you never really feel any dread or any fear or tension. For the most part, in Resident Evil 5, you feel like an experienced soldier who is taking out more than just dangerous foes. You do feel like you are facing a somewhat unstoppable threat because of how powerful the enemies are. I mean, you're literally fighting mutated abominations in Resident Evil 5, but you still feel like that badass soldier who knows what he's doing, and you still know that you're going to survive. Even when playing on the hardest difficulty, Resident Evil 5 is just not a very scary experience. It's not a very horror-like game. It doesn't even feel like Resident Evil. The only thing that Resident Evil 5 retained is the reoccurring characters of Chris Redfield and Albert Wesker. It still had some puzzles here and there, and the monsters and all the Resident Evil type mutations and abominations, all of those things are still there. Resident Evil 5 still feels like a Resident Evil game in terms of the subject matter, because the subject matter of Resident Evil is pretty recognizable and pretty unique. You know, you're fighting monsters, there's all of these viruses around that turn people into these monsters, and there's fucking parasites that make people have tentacles grow out the necks that look like gigantic dicks. I mean, you know, the subject matter is the same, but everything else could not be more different. The core gameplay, the puzzles, bro, even the inventory system and the crafting in Resident Evil 5 just does not feel the same as the previous Resident Evil games. I'm surprised that Resident Evil 5 still had the fucking the little herbs that you use in the other Resident Evil games. And like I said before, this is the reason why Resident Evil 5 was just not a very good game to me. But at the same time, I can't argue with the fact that it was a fun game. Resident Evil 5 was a fun game, and the action, for the most part, the action was fun. Resident Evil 5 is like that one game in every franchise that does something so different that it feels unrecognizable when compared to the previous games. It doesn't even feel like it's a part of that franchise, but at the same time, sometimes it is okay to have extremely different entries in a franchise that mostly uses the same type of formula. But like I said, they could have just added some new ingredients. Like, I don't think they needed to change Resident Evil 5 so dramatically like they did, you know, because like I said, although it's okay to have extremely different sequels to kind of add some variety and some freshness into a franchise, when you make the sequel feel like it's not even a part of that franchise anymore, that can mostly cause an identity crisis in a video game franchise, because all of a sudden the sequel no longer feels like it's a part of the franchise that people love. You know, I mean, it's okay to try and do different things. It's okay to add add some new ingredients, add some new elements, perhaps. I mean, that's what a sequel is supposed to do. A sequel is supposed to be different, and it's supposed to be new. It's supposed to feel new. It's supposed to add new things. But it's not supposed to change everything to the point where it doesn't even feel like it's a part of that franchise anymore. Resident Evil 5 does not feel like a Resident Evil game. It feels more like some kind of spin-off than a mainline entry. And I think that's the biggest reason why Resident Evil 5 was just not that good. It changed the franchise for the worse. And of course, since Resident Evil 5 was still successful, this gave Capcom the idea that people actually liked all of the action over the horror, and then of course this abomination was born because of that. So I just don't think that Capcom should have went the action side with Resident Evil 5. I mean, there are so many other action horror games that were able to retain all of their horror elements while still having a good amount of action. Resident Evil 4, a game from the same franchise as 5, the original Alan Wake, the Callisto Protocol, the Evil Within 1 and 2, all of those other action horror games, those games had a pretty good amount of action, and yet they still had all of their horror elements. They still felt like actual horror games. Resident Evil 5, bro, Resident Evil 5 does not even feel like a horror game, let alone a Resident Evil game, which is why I believe that Resident Evil 5 is the best, worst Resident Evil game. They didn't just change the formula, they changed everything in general. Like, the only thing they didn't change was the subject matter. They had the reoccurring characters, they brought back some of the puzzles, and that was about it. for the most part, Resident Evil 5 was just a straight up third person beat 'em up action shooter. I mean, there was barely any horror elements at all. I mean, there were some. Resident Evil 5 feels like more of an intense experience than a straight up survival horror experience. I mean, there's no resource management, there's barely any puzzles. Even the controls and the overall gameplay just feel so different. Resident Evil 5 has a lot more weapons than Resident Evil 4 had, that's for sure. And of course, the co-op feature. Look, I'm not going to say that Resident Evil 5 was a straight-up bad game, because it wasn't. It was more of a fun Resident Evil game. You've got Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are straight-up horror games. You've got Resident Evil 7 and 8. 8 with the fucking baby fetus monster. Some fucking uncanny shit right there. Then you've got Resident Evil 5, which... Resident Evil 5 just felt like that one spin-off in a franchise that was just focused more on just fun and casual stuff more than actually being a serious mainline entry like the other sequels in the Resident Evil series. Not that Resident Evil 5 is not a mainline entry, I mean it is, it's just that it didn't feel like one. You know, Resident Evil 5 felt more like a... It felt more like a spin-off. You know, that's what a game of its nature feels like. You know, that's what a game like Resident Evil 5 ends up feeling like. Because when a game in a familiar franchise that usually has, you know, one type of gameplay formula that just changes and gets you improvements as the sequels go on, Resident Evil 5 is that one game that feels so incredibly different that it feels like it's a spin-off in the franchise more so than a sequel. Because, like I said, the Resident Evil franchise has always had one type of gameplay, survival horror, and that's why people loved it. And they did go on to improve upon it and add new elements in each new entry, but Resident Evil 5 just felt completely different. I mean, if Resident Evil 5 was the first game in the Resident Evil series, then Resident Evil would not even be a survival horror franchise to begin with. And again, like I said earlier, I know that people are going to come at me in the comments with this. I know that it sounds like I'm basically complaining about the fact that the franchise just wanted variety and it just wanted to have a sequel that was something new and something fresh, basically a whole new idea. That's okay, but they still could have done it better. They could have made Resident Evil 5 the game that it was, the more action Resident Evil game. All they had to do was just add the horror elements like Resident Evil 4 had. And then some people will say, well, then it would just feel like Resident Evil 4 again. It would just feel like another action horror game. Like, it's good that it had so much action because it felt like a totally different game and a totally new sequel and everything. But they still could have done it better, in my opinion, because Resident Evil 5, the reason why it's a bad game, in my opinion at least, is because it doesn't feel like Resident Evil. It doesn't feel like an action horror game. It feels like a third-person game, and it just feels like a third-person action game. It doesn't even feel like a horror game. There's barely any horror in Resident Evil 5, and that's why it was a bad game to me, because it's a game in a franchise that was known for survival horror, and then you've got Resident Evil 5 just coming in here like it's a fucking Call of Duty game, but in a third-person perspective. I mean, some may say that I'm biased, and maybe I am. I mean, bro, I became a fan of Resident Evil because of its survival horror elements, not the fucking action shit, okay? The first Resident Evil game that I ever actually beat and played was Resident Evil 7, so I became a fan of Resident Evil because of the horror, not the action. Now, if they was to do a remake of Resident Evil 5, this is what I think they should add to make a Resident Evil 5 remake good. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. You're thinking that I'm going to say they should completely redo Resident Evil 5 and they should just make it more of a straight-up horror game like the rest of the games. No. Because one thing about Resident Evil 5 is one of the reasons why it was actually still a good game, even though it didn't feel like a Resident Evil game, was actually because of its gameplay. The fun action gameplay of Resident Evil 5 is the reason why it was still a good game and why I still actually enjoyed it, despite not liking the fact that it was not a survival horror game like the previous Resident Evils. So, I don't think that they should just change everything. I think the only thing that should remain the same in an RE5 remake is the gameplay, the story, and the characters, but they should change a lot of other things. And basically what I think they should change is they should add a few more horror elements. Make the atmosphere, for example. Resident Evil 5 remake should have a much more darker and more sinister atmosphere, because the thing about Resident Evil 5, I was kind of exaggerating when I said it had absolutely no horror at all. Resident Evil 5, like I said, felt more like an intense thrill ride than a straight up horror game. But it did have some scary moments here and there. So for Resident Evil 5 Remake, basically what they should do is they should make it more darker and more sinister. They should add more horror elements, maybe redo a few of the segments here and there, and here's the thing. Since this is a remake, I don't think I would mind if they added a few new elements as well. I mean, that's kind of what a remake is supposed to do. I mean, if a remake was literally just a shot-for-shot redo of an older game with just a gameplay overhaul, then I don't even think it would be a good remake. You know, it would be more like this, and we don't want that for Resident Evil 5 Remake. So basically what they should do is they should actually go above and beyond, and they actually should change and add some new things in the Resident Evil 5 Remake. Add some new segments perhaps, maybe add some new elements to the story and the lore of Resident Evil 5, add some better gameplay mechanics, bring back that parry system. But instead of using a knife, Chris will just parry with his fucking fist. Like, bring back that parry system. Improve the gameplay, add new segments, add new horror elements, maybe do some improvements to the story, improve what needs to be improved, and improve even what doesn't need to be improved, because that'll just make the experience overall better in general. So, like I said, add new things while also changing things that should be changed, and just add things where you feel things should be added. Capcom are the masters of adding new things to their remakes. I mean, that's why the remakes have been so successful. So, you know, just add more horror elements, add some new segments, add some new story bits here and there, change a few things around. Just make the Resident Evil 5 remake feel fresh. Make it feel like something special. Make the remake actually feel like a Resident Evil game. And I don't think they should change the gameplay. Like I said, I think, in my opinion, the Resident Evil 5 remake should feel like Resident Evil 4 remake, but with way more combat, way more action, and way more terror. They should add more horror elements in Resident Evil 5. And the reason for that is because if you look at the concept of Resident Evil 5, like the overall story and the plot and the monsters that you face, there is a lot of potential to add a lot more horror in a newer remade version of Resident Evil 5. Maybe even more so than Resident Evil 4 perhaps, or Resident Evil 3. So I feel like Capcom, they have to strike the iron while it's hot. They have lightning, they have potential lightning in a bottle here. Are they going to let it out and just fly away? Or are they going to make something wonderful out of that lightning that they got in a bottle? Personally, I think what they should do, if I was like the lead director of Resident Evil 5 Remake, I would add more horror elements. I would add a bit more tension and intensity. Bro, the combat in my version, if it was my version of RE5 Remake, the combat would make your heart beat so fast, you would probably end up in cardiac arrest. Like, it would be so intense if I was the director, because I feel like that's another thing that made Resident Evil 5 good. The fact that Resident Evil 5 had more action also made it more intense, because it's not like you were just fighting like just generic bad guys. You were still fighting the monsters and the mutants like you usually fight in the other Resident Evil games. So they can add so much more terror and fear in the combat and also make it so much more intense. I mean, they can make this shit like Dark Souls even. You know, they can make it so much more skill-based as well. There's just so much room for improvement. So to me, I think that's what they should do for an RE5 remake. They should make it more horror-based a little bit. Still keep its action. Make it like The Evil Within if you have to. I mean, if you take inspiration from any other horror game, take it from that one. Make it more like Evil Within, because Evil Within done a great job at retaining its horror elements while also having a lot of action. And even the combat in The Evil Within still was pretty scary and heart-pounding. So that's what I think they should do for a Resident Evil 5 remake. And of course, the biggest thing that they need to not change is the boulder punch. If I don't see Chris punching that boulder, I will call Sony myself, and I will have Resident Evil 5 Remake be refunded when I buy it if that boulder punch scene is not there. Don't change anything about the story. Just add some new things. Like, when it comes to a remake, You don't want to change things that don't need to be changed. Instead, you want to add new things that make the remake actually seem like it's a brand new, reimagined, and new version of an older game that the remake is based on. Don't change anything. Don't remove anything. You want to instead just add new. Add new things, change things that should be changed, and make them better. You know, improve upon what needs to be improved upon, and improve things that even don't need to be improved. Just make everything better than it was in the original. That's what a remake is supposed to be. It's supposed to be one just big overall improvement of the original in general, while also still being a reimagined version. And that's probably what makes it a reimagined version, because it's improved, it's better, it's got better segments, it's got new things. Like, adding new things to a remake of an older game is not only good, but it's also a way to pay tribute to the original by making even the original seem new again, because it's still the same concept and it's still the same story, but you're adding new elements to that same concept and same story, because obviously they don't change the story in a remake. They just change, you know, everything else. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Do let me know down in the comments, what do you think they can add for a Resident Evil 5 remake? I am very excited to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions below. Personally, like I said, all I think they need to change in a Resident Evil 5 remake is just add some more horror elements, add some new segments, make the gameplay better, you know, just improve upon things like that. That's all they need to do. It shouldn't be hard for Capcom, you know? It shouldn't be hard for them at all. It'll definitely be easier than it was for the Resident Evil 4 remake, you know, because Resident Evil 4, obviously that game being way more iconic than Resident Evil 5, yeah, I think Capcom is definitely going to have an easier time remaking Resident Evil 5 than Resident Evil 4. So, yeah. Anyways, guys, thank you so very, very much for watching. If you stuck by all the way till the end, thank you so very, very much. I greatly appreciate that. It warms my heart when people actually love to hear what I have to say. Just makes me feel like people actually give a shit about my opinion. So, you know, just makes me happy to know that people are actually listening. But, yeah, if you guys are still here literally right now, timestamp, thank you so very much. It really means a lot to me. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if this video actually earned those things from you. I appreciate criticism as well. Let me know what could I improved upon in this video. You know, I appreciate criticism as well. That's fine. Yeah, any support. But yeah, I'll take any support I can get. You know, even criticism is good. You know, criticism also has a purpose. So yeah, I'm not afraid of that. But anyways, thank you guys so very much. If you enjoyed this video, let me know down in the comments. I love interacting with you guys. Let me know down in the comments your thoughts and opinions below about the Resident Evil 5 remake. I would love to hear them. And, yeah. Anyways, I will see you guys next time here on the Dread Central Show. Same place, hopefully same time. And, yeah. Take care, y'all, and peace out.
Goldstein having also wrestled with the subject, but that was 2009, a time when race was apparently a debate rather than a reality. In the 2020s, in a post-Black Lives Matter world, there is only one acceptable response to a white man shooting waves of Africans for an entire video game. No.
Bro, what the fuck? They're literally zombies. I'm not sure what kind of tea this British man was drinking, but I think it's cutting off the oxygen to his brain. It's not like you're killing just normal African people. You're killing them because they're zombies. Bro, people like this is exactly what's wrong with fucking society nowadays.